Welcome to Midlife Matters. I'm Marie, and each week I'm joined by my friends Julie and Mindy to talk about all the topics keeping women in the middle years up at night. Today we're talking about time. Join us as we share what dates us, whether we consider ourselves lazy or productive, and how we can redeem the time we're given. Let's get started. Listeners, today we're talking about time. And we're talking about time in many different ways, including what dates us. And Julie, when you brought this up, I thought that was so funny because before we get into how to mark our days and how to make the most of our time, it is interesting to think about what dates each one of us. And we're all a little bit apart in age, so they're not all the same. So I'm excited to hear what dates you guys. And I had to give some thought about what dated myself. So it's very interesting. But yeah, listeners, today we want to talk about time. We want to talk about how to make the most of your time, how to mark your days, whether you think you're a busy or a lazy person, whether you think that you squander time or are as super productive as possibly can be. We've got a lot of areas to cover, and this is going to be a fun episode.
And ending up with how we redeem our time.
Okay.
That'll be the positive turn to all of this.
Yes.
That's what we need.
We do. All right. Well, let's start out, Julie, with what dates us. And since you're the oldest, why don't you tell us what dates you?
Well, not only what dates us, but just that since we're all products of a particular era, that shapes our perspective, just what we grew up with, even just things that events and experiences and what was going on in the world affects us. And I thought, okay, I was born in the South. I mean, that shapes your perspective. I was born in a city that had a lot of racial tension. I mean, Martin Luther King was assassinated in my hometown. Like that's a black mark on you know,
Yes.
and so that affected my growing up. I remember when I was little, every night, you know, the news was on and it was the Vietnam War. For the first 10 years of my life, that's what I saw playing on the evening news, you know. And that affects you like in subtle ways. Like I grew up during the Cold War where at school we had like now they have shooter drills. We had Cold War drills, you know, like And so growing up with that whole nuclear threat and I was raised Baptist. I was raised in a church. That affects us. I recently saw that movie, The Jesus Movement or Jesus Jesus Revolution? And I kind of thought about how I was a byproduct of that somehow, you know, like the music that came out of that. I grew up on that music in church, you know, the Pass It On, Kumbaya, all that music. I don't know. I'm an only child. I always think that kind of defines me in a different way than other people. So those were some of the things that entered my mind.
Yes. I liked hearing about that because one in particular sticks out to me. Like it seemed like whenever we got to the history books, when we were finishing up at the end of every school year, we never covered the Vietnam War. Even though it obviously was such a big part of, you know, recent history, it seemed like I barely even knew why it started. And I definitely didn't know it was 10 years. Like we just barely touched on it because you were always studying other parts of history. So that's so interesting.
I still don't really understand it.
Yeah. It's so interesting that you lived it and it shaped the first 10 years of your life. Because by the time I can remember, the Vietnam War wasn't on the news anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, the things that I remember talk of the Jimmy Carter era, like talk of gas lines. I remember my parents complaining about very high homeowner interest rates. I remember talk of the Jimmy Carter era, but my real memories begin in the Ronald Reagan era. And I can remember when he was, when the assassination attempt was, coming home from school and watching like the news coverage of that as an elementary student. And just over and over again, like that's all that was on every single station. And I remember that. I grew up in the era of TV. I think it was a fun era of TV, like Dukes of Hazzard, The A-Team, Little House on the Prairie. Only had 3 channels, no cable till I went to high school. Grew up during the age of the Space Shuttle Challenger explosion. I remember being in health class and stopping instruction, them turning on the TV, and then that was what we were discussing the rest of the day. I don't remember. I forgot to look up what it was, but I remember I was around for is it like Feed the World rally? It was like the first televised thing where all
the big
these
concert.
Yes, like all these musicians raised money for food, and you learned about starving people in other countries. Like I can remember, I remember that on TV. Grew up in the era of MTV. The AIDS crisis. I can remember all
I forgot about all these things.
I wrote all that down. That's so funny.
Yeah, all the, like, my mother loved Oprah, but this maybe was a little bit before Oprah. She loved Phil Donahue, like all those interviewee type. And I remember them interviewing people about AIDS and listening from the other room and finding out about that. I grew up in the era of latchkey kids. I don't know if I was the first generation, but there was just a lot of talk of us. We would get off the bus by ourselves, let ourselves in, be in charge of our own selves until our parents got home, for work. We'd get ourselves to school. They would have already left for work. Like that was that era. We had no internet, very limited pictures. Pictures we have are like our eyes are closed. It's blurry. Like there wasn't a lot of taking
Polaroids.
pictures. Yes. And we had limited access to what your choices and opportunities were in the world. Like I knew about colleges if I knew someone had gone there. I knew about a career if I knew someone that was that. You didn't just Google things. There wasn't any way to do that. You'd have to know someone who knew someone who knew someone. And that was how
you wrote to them.
Yes.
And they sent you a big packet of literature on the college.
Yes. Like you saw something in a catalog that you never heard of. Like that was how your mind expanded. It wasn't just as instantaneous as it is for this generation. So that's kind of like the era that I grew up in. Mindy, what was your era like? Because you're younger than me.
I know we're slowly creeping into later years. This is interesting. So the era that I grew up in, first I'll start with, I was born in the Southeast in the Bible Belt. My family, even though my dad was in the military, we mainly lived in the Southeast area of the United States. Now, him being in the military made us very aware of the world, other people. It kept us moving. You guys know that part of my story. But the Gulf War really impacted our family because eventually my dad ended up going to Afghanistan to be a part of the aftermath of that conflict. The eras that I grew up in was really the Bushes, Clinton, Reagan. To my generation, Reagan was the good old days. And very much, Marie, I wrote down the AIDS pandemic. I wrote down MTV after school, and I could only see that at my friend's house. Hello Kitty when I was younger, Barbie when I was younger, Madonna, Tiffany when I was a little older, Goonies and Back to the Future kind of marked my era. Contemporary Christian music made a huge splash with Amy Grant. Stephen Curtis Chapman and Michael W. Smith were my favorite artists. And if you guys ever remember Carmen, he was a hilarious comedian, Christian music. Because I lived in the Southeast mainly, Julie mentioned the racism in Memphis, and that really marked where we lived. The South was still grappling with the changes. And my mom, I remember her talking about being part of like the first class in high school to go to integrated high schools. And she was bused to originally Black high school, and Black students were bused to the white high schools. And she talked about her memories there, but also still just the South was still dealing with the aftermath of that. And so other than that, it was all tie-dye and neon colors. And and I wanted to be Debbie Gibson. So that about marks my childhood.
I can so see that, Mindy. So even just within ourselves, even just within the three of us with age differences of like 7 or so years between each of us, there still was quite a bit of difference in each of our growing up experiences. And so if we talk about larger age differences, like if we talk about, between parents and children, like maybe 30 years, that can cause two people to see the same issues from completely different angles. And so what are some examples of when the generation gap has caused you to see things from a different perspective?
So I thought about parenting, how parenting has changed, the styles. And I remember I was heavily influenced by Focus on the Family and Dr. James Dobson. He had a lot of book, Bringing Up Boys and The Strong-Willed Child. And I read all those books. And I remember my mom reading Dr. Spock. And that probably sounds crazy. I'm not talking about Star Trek here. That he was a very famous pediatrician that wrote a best-selling book on child rearing. And I remember seeing that in our home, growing up. And so it's just funny. I don't know what parents look at today, if there's an author or if it's all just internet based or what. But I think each generation follows a different philosophy.
Style.
Yeah, a different style.
Right.
And then an obvious one that we've probably talked about before was tattoos. Because I remember we had a neighbor. He was a little bit older man, and he loved to sit out in his lawn chair and watch us, all the kids, play in the yard and stuff. He's just a really nice guy. But in the heat of the summer, he would always be in long sleeves. And I think we asked him one time, and he had a tattoo on his arm, and it was like an American eagle and a heart that said mom or something like that. And he was so ashamed. He had been in the Air Force. And when he was overseas, he got a tattoo, and he was so ashamed of it. And he didn't want us kids to know that he had it.
Really?
And I thought, that is so different now, because here he is apologizing for something that now your pastor and your worship leader at church may have and be covered in, just the perspective has changed. But I think it helps younger generations to understand why we might not be as accepting of things like that at first, because of what it meant. It meant something different 30 years ago, 50 years ago. And so it just takes time for people to accept those changes. But to me, that was just a very obvious one. And I know it's even harder, for grandparent generations to understand that,
Right.
But it just no longer has the same connotation.
No, it really doesn't.
A couple things I thought of were dancing, just enjoying dancing. And that because I was raised more in the Bible Belt than really anywhere else, this very conservative style of church, I'll even say worship, like hymns versus now praise worship songs, that's been a big shift. And so I love both, because I even have a hymnal still in my house that's what, when I pull out my flute once a year, I play hymns,
Me too, on the piano. I still have a hymn book.
Yes. And it's something that I do have a love for that, but I also love praise and worship. It's funny, Julie, you mentioned the James Dobson books. I was an old soul when I became a mom, even though I was, so young. I had Abby at 21 and the rest of my kids through my 20s. But those are the books that my mom passed to me that I was looking for wisdom in. Whereas now I'm like, well, it's podcasts, podcasts were not a thing. And I think about cell phones and the internet in general. We didn't even have it growing up. And now people have their total income and livelihood could be on through the internet at home doing remote work. And to me, that would have been baffling to think about.
Right.
And so just, the internet being available everywhere has really changed our society. And then the last thing, and I even noticed that this is very different geographically, even today, is just how casual we dress for church now. I remember it being a huge deal to really dress your best on Sunday morning. And now, jeans are totally accepted. Well, we could have never worn jeans on a Sunday morning when I was younger. But when we lived up in Pennsylvania, it was even more casual. We joked that our dress for church was way too formal, even though we thought casual already. But no, the dress code on a Sunday morning up in Pennsylvania was an Eagles jersey and jeans.
You're ready for the game afterwards.
And we were like, we really don't have the right church clothes for, it was really, really stark, that stark of a difference. But, again, it's just these things that you're like, oh, that's just tradition. That doesn't mean it's right. That was just our tradition.
Right. Well, when you said that your whole livelihood and everything is on the internet, I thought you were going to say there's such a difference. Like when I was growing up, You didn't know what anyone paid for their house. You didn't know how much money they made. You didn't know, I mean, unless they told you. Now, all that stuff is such public information, and my kids think nothing of knowing everything about everyone. It just feels
that's true, Marie.
It feels like such a lack of privacy in a way to me, but to them, it doesn't. It's just like a given.
Right.
Now, like, you can pretty much find out anything about anyone with just a little bit of digging.
Yes.
We met someone the other day, and all I knew was their first name and their phone number. And the person I was with was like, oh, well, they're already telling me what their career is and all that. I said, how did you find that out? Like, we know nothing about this person. And they're like, oh, well, if you have their first name and their phone number, you can find out pretty much anything. I'm like, you don't even need their last name?
That's true, Marie, because now you meet someone, and if you're intrigued, you will Google that person.
Mm-hmm.
And, you can find so much out about them.
Yes. A funny generational difference, though, that I just had to share because it's come up a few times in our family. Okay, so have you guys ever heard of that saying, pork, the other white meat?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So
it was on TV.
Yes. My daughter-in-law, when she first started dating my son, she doesn't eat red meat. And I thought, okay, I'll make pork. And I think I mentioned something to Davis, and he goes, she doesn't eat pork. I said, pork, the other white meat. That pork is not a white meat. I Googled it. I thought, pork is a white meat. I grew up hearing pork is a white meat. So I Googled it at the time, and that was all a marketing thing to try to compete with chicken, which I never knew. It was hugely successful because a whole generation still believes that pork is the other white meat. But anyways, so Maddie's been in our family for quite a few years now, but we were out to dinner with Maddie and Davis. Now they're married. The other night, and we were at a restaurant, and she was trying to decide what to order, obviously staying away from the red meat. And Steve goes, oh, well, you can order this. Davis goes, well, no, it has pork. And Steve goes, well, pork's a white meat. And I'm like, it's not. He goes, pork, the other white meat, Marie. I'm like, I know. I Googled this a few years ago. It's actually not a white meat, believe it or not.
Oh,
I'm still not
my
convinced.
Goodness.
I know. I had to Google it.
Like, isn't there white and dark in a pig, just like the chicken?
No, there isn't. And I looked it up. Like, nutritionists classify pork as a red meat, but none of us know
seriously.
that. I just think it's so funny because a whole generation from marketing on TV and the commercial we saw that was obviously so super successful, we believe that pork is a white meat.
We have all been lied to. I feel duped.
It's totally true. So anyways, I just had to share that because it keeps coming up. All right. Well, we humans are bound by time. We have a limited perspective and we're born with limited years. We typically inhabit a space of just 70 to 80 years. I hate thinking about that, Julie. Julie wrote this question.
I think that's getting longer. Okay, we're going to give this maybe 70 to 90.
Okay, 70 to 90. Okay. But we're limited and bound by time, and it's really hard sometimes to make sense of how things seem to happen at whatever time they choose, and certainly not on our own. And the Bible in Ecclesiastes says there's a season and a time for everything, and a time for every matter under the sun. And it goes on to say he has made everything beautiful in its time. So those are such familiar words. We hear songs about them and everything else. But when we look at the timing of our lives, does it always feel that way as from a human perspective? Does it feel like there's a time and a season for everything and that everything is made beautiful in his time?
I think that it's easy to acknowledge that there's a time for everything. Like, we love to quote that verse. But we have pretty strong opinions on when those times should occur. Like, the time to heal is anytime we have someone sick.
Right.
It's always the time to heal. The time to be quiet is after I've spoken my mind, after I'm done speaking my mind. The time to die is at the end of a very long, full life and not a moment before. I think we like to hang on to the part that we like, and we want it to happen when we want it to happen. So like when things don't go in our time, I think a lot of times it can feel like God's temporarily checked out, or maybe doesn't know what he's doing. Like, what is he thinking? Where is he?
Right.
Yeah, I did read in this book on the He has made everything beautiful in his time.
Mm-hmm.
That the quote was something, I'm just paraphrasing, but it was something like, sometimes it takes more than a lifetime to make ugly beautiful. Like we don't always get to see, just because it doesn't happen in our 70 to 80 years, doesn't mean God's not in it and he's going to redeem it. Sometimes it takes a long time.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes.
But we tend to believe those words will happen where we can experience it,
Yes.
from Ecclesiastes.
Yes, that's so true. Because even in Hebrews, it talks about when it's talking about the faith of the past patriarchs and generations and in the Bible, and it's talking about their faith. It doesn't say that they saw the things on earth, that they were still looking forward. They were looking ahead. And so they didn't experience them in an earthly place. And we don't have that perspective. So I know in the midst of suffering, time lasts way too long. And the beauty that I'm longing for doesn't come fast enough. And I have a hard time trusting that God is going to make everything beautiful in its time, because sometimes things are lost or broken that you feel are unredeemable. And you can't imagine a life without the thing that you're holding on to. And it doesn't seem fair, and you don't know how God could ever make it right. How can he bring beauty from ashes? And then years and years later, if you're blessed, you're able to look back and see how he did bring beauty from ashes. You'll see how he redeemed something that you thought was unredeemable. And looking back, you remember his kindnesses, and you start to see the miracles that happened in the season of suffering that you couldn't see at the time. So it truly is wisdom to be able to say that, and very difficult to feel and acknowledge on a daily basis, depending on what season you're in.
I wonder if past generations had a little bit easier time of this, had a little bit easier time waiting for time. I feel like we just expect everything to happen so quickly, because in general it does. And like all our entertainment is wrapped up in an hour. And I mean, I'm thinking of like the series 24. Okay, that was really only 24 hours. Think of all that happened in 24 hours. Even like a redecorating show on HGTV, an hour long.
Yeah.
Like the house went from shambles to, oh my goodness, this is my dream home in an hour. And like your average Joe who's been remodeling for the last 10 years is like, what am I doing wrong? And I think a lot of times we feel that way in this society. If we don't see instantaneous redemption, we're like, oh, well, my thing, that must have been God asleep at the wheel.
Yeah, they never show waiting. I used to laugh at those shows because John was a stickler for, like, if you painted a bookcase, it had to cure for like a month before you put a book on it. Oh. And those shows, they were painting the afternoon, and then the books went on the shelves. I just thought that was so funny. Like, all those books are stuck to that shelf just to make this happen in an hour. Yeah,
and like our food is so instantaneous. Previous generations really had to like wait for their bread to rise in front of their eyes. Like they really had to like harvest the ingredients and like get it ready to prepare. We don't have to do any of that. So we just expect maybe things to move faster.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, do you have any unresolved sorrows or hurts in your life or in other lives that have ever made you doubt God? And I just think that everyone can put a resounding yes after this.
Certainly, yes. I think, and I think we'll always struggle with that in this life to kind of make sense of it all, because God is timeless and infinite, and we're not. So it's just hard to meld those two ways of thought. It kind of makes me think. I just saw my grandson. He was here last weekend, and trying to explain to him like he's going to have a new baby brother in July. Well, every day he asks his mom, "Is he here yet?" Like he can't, he has no concept of waiting till July. Or you think about trying to tell a child it's 9 months till Christmas, or, like they just can't understand it. No matter how hard you try to explain it, they just, and it's not that they have a wrong view of time. They just don't have the same perspective that we do. And I imagine that's a little bit how God feels like. I know we were at the zoo with Ezra, and he would want to sit by one exhibit and never leave. And I was thinking, Ezra, the monkeys are next. You're not going to believe what the monkeys are doing. Like, let's move on. And he would have just sat right there our whole zoo visit. And I think, and like us, we could sit in discontent and sorrow and grief and not move on. Or, like we just can't see what's coming around the bend. And it could be good or bad, but God sees that whole long view. And we only see what's right in front of us, like a child.
Yeah, that's a good zoo analogy, because just like we see, but you're going to love the next one and the next one. Or, this one really isn't that great. Like, you think this one's great, but really this exhibit's going to pale in comparison.
Yeah, like, wait till you see this,
Right. Well, I think about, you give amounts of information based on levels of maturity. And so, like with a small child, you can't say Christmas is in 9 months, for example, like what you said, because they don't understand 9 months. You would just like, okay, this is a need to know basis. I'll tell you when Christmas is going to come. We're not going to talk about it until then, because you're going to have a million questions that and so you learn, you hold information until it's time, because the child can't handle it. Well, I feel like that's how God sees us.
That's a great analogy.
We cannot handle the information. We can't handle the big picture. And so we have to stay so close to him, holding his hand as he leads and guides us through each thing, because it might cause more fear or anxiety. And we just have to learn to trust him in the dailiness, because it's a need to know situation, and he's the only one that needs to know. We just need to follow him.
So true. Like, if you'd known some of the difficult things of your life in advance, would you have ever wanted to know those things?
Right.
No. Like, it would have been just too much to handle.
But he shows us the end. He shows us the hope in the future. And so the older we get, the more we realize that delayed gratification, or we've seen, success come after hardship, or beauty from ashes. And we can start to maybe think that there might be a possibility for hope.
Well, even though we can't expect to comprehend the timing of God, who transcends yesterday, today, and tomorrow, like you said, Mindy, we can trust him with our time, and that means making good use of the time we're given. Making good use of the time you're given. That always sounds so simple. But how can we do that? How can we make the best use of our time? Julie, you had some ideas on this. Do you want to talk about them?
Yeah, the first way that I thought about making the best use of our time is like how we deal with the past, like letting go of the past, leaving what's in the past. And that is easier said than done. Because I think one way that kind of creeps in that may tell us that we're not handling the past well is regret. That really makes it hard to move forward when we're dwelling on the past. We should certainly learn from the past. I'm not saying that, but just not beating ourselves up. Like, we're maybe not where we want to be, but at least we're not where we were. Like, acknowledging, like we've talked about in What If It's Wonderful, acknowledging growth and change, that those are all good things, worthy things to acknowledge. Another thing that I thought about with how we deal with the past was nostalgia. And nothing is wrong with nostalgia. I mean, we all like to think about things warmly and, from the past. But if we idolize a better time, like if we're always looking for a better time that was the past, like maybe, I don't know, this is kind of stereotypical with old people, like the good old days, or we might long for days before we got some bad news, or before someone died, or, as midlife women, you're like, when our kids were at home or little, like whatever it is. And it's okay to grieve losses, but I think we have to be careful not to live in like resentment of the loss. There's a fine line there. Like, I think God wants us to grieve and feel those feelings, but to not always be living like the past was better and there's not anything good in the future or the present.
Right. So letting go of the past is something that I feel like was the catalyst for my journaling. Like I had to kind of give it to somebody, something, like I needed to get it out. Because I realized when I did start journaling and started looking back, I'd remember what happened yesterday, and I was starting to look for how God was moving. And then I've talked about even looking at my calendar, like what were we doing last season or a year ago? What were we doing? And I started seeing kind of some patterns of forgetting how God had moved or forgetting how God had answered prayer. And so I realized I needed to kind of learn from my own past and be able to see that through a view of God and his mercies and how he was moving. Because by remembering the past and learning from it, it started to teach me to look to the future more with hope and possibility. And it gave me peace. Whereas before I could have easily stuffed, seasons that were difficult or seasons of suffering and always had a negative view when I thought about it. And I was like, no, don't think about it. Don't think about it. That was a bad time. Well, now I'm happy to think about it because I'm focusing on how God brought us out of that, the things he did through it, and the characters that he developed, the characteristics that he was able to develop through it, and how it's changed us to be more like him. So that's been a big learning curve for me when looking at the past.
Yeah. So you're not resenting the past, you're learning from the past.
Trying to learn from it, but see it in view of God's mercies.
Yeah. The next thing would be maybe letting go of the future. So I guess we're trying to get to living in the present. So letting go of the past, letting go of the future. And I thought, well, there's kind of two ways that this could be a negative. It's like if we dread the future, because the future is filled with all kinds of uncertainty for all of us. But I think sometimes things happen in our lives that start to make us more aware of that, like illnesses, job losses. I know I'm kind of getting into that when my prayers are all about wanting to know the future, God, just let me know that this is going to be this way, or you're going to do this, or, instead of my prayer is just leaning on the Lord for today. I love that Corrie ten Boom quote says, never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God. I think I've mentioned that quote at least 3 times on this podcast, but it's
keep
just
mentioning it.
So good. Yeah. And then I thought about anticipation. So these are kind of the opposites. Like you could dread the future, or you could just be so anticipating it. And nothing's wrong with looking forward to something in the future unless it's keeping you from today. And I think this might be more true with younger women, like wanting to be out of the diaper stage or the crawling stage or the whatever stage. You're always looking for that next thing. And that's very normal, but just, I guess it could become problematic if you see the future as an escape from where you are right now. That's when it would be unhealthy. So those things can all keep us from living in the present. Do either one of you feel like you tend to dwell more in the past or the future? Like, do you struggle with one of those more than the other?
I don't think so. I did ask my daughter and my husband if they thought I did struggle with one or the other, but they said they thought I was balanced. I mean, it's not like I'm always talking about the good old days, and it's not like I'm always saying I can't wait till I get to this point. So I guess I feel like I'm balanced in that area. I don't know.
I know I had to learn how to let go of the future because I recognized that even though God had answered a lot of prayers and brought us out of a season of suffering and essentially brought us to a season of rest, I had still a lack of peace. I still had a lack of hope. This can even bring on physical symptoms. If you have anxiety or fear about the future, if you're noticing that you're running to other things to kind of tamper down those feelings of anxiety, if you're losing sleep, waking up in the middle of the night with your heart racing, your mind racing, gaining or losing weight, those are some physical symptoms. But I had to learn how to let go of the future. And that was a learned thing. And one verse that was really, actually, there's 2 verses that have been meaningful to me. One is be still and know that I am God. And to take that verse and dwell on it and realize what it means is being still is you're not striving. You're not running from thing to thing. You're not filling a void. You're not filling your anxiety with anything. To be able to be at rest and lay down and surrender and open your clenched fist as you recognize that God is God. And that's all we need in any and every situation, learning to trust in his character. And the other verse is part of that. Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Because I found that at times of peace, I wasn't feeling at peace. And that I had to learn how to let go of the future. And so that's kind of a litmus test. Like, can I be still? Can I be quiet? Am I okay? Do I trust God to be God in that? Because it didn't come as easy in the season of rest as it did when I was searching for him so much during the season of suffering.
True. Yeah. I feel like if I'm going to pick one or the other to be kind of sinful in, it would be more dreading the future. And not so much right now, but when John first got diagnosed, I really struggle with that, just dreading the uncertainties of the future and always thinking, like even I'd look at a photograph and that was pre-cancer diagnosis, or that was before this happened, and I've just gotten to a place of more trust through it all as the time has gone by. But yeah, I don't feel like I struggle with the past much. I don't think about the past. I'm going to dwell in the future more, and I'm going to struggle with that more.
Yeah, I think we've all gone through seasons where there's been something that we're dreading, and then we do find ourselves having those sleepless nights and those, we either can't eat or we're eating too much. We can't focus. We're just because we're dreading something.
So the goal here is, if we're letting go of the past, letting go of the future, is how can we live today, fully today? I was reading this book that talked about how do we squander today? Like, how do we waste today? And the kind of the two ends of the spectrum were laziness and busyness. And I want to be careful. I'm not saying that I don't think any of us would be labeled a lazy person, or, but I mean, we all have tendencies to be lazy at times or be over busy. I don't think it characterizes who we are, but laziness says, there's always more time. I'll get to that whenever. And it shows up like procrastination, excuses for showing up very late to things or missing things or whatever, just basically it's spending your time without considering the cost,
Right.
And then busyness would say, there'll never be enough time to do all that I have to do, because you're trying to cram more in one day than can possibly ever happen,
Right.
And I think that's kind of in this move, that's where I am right now, is just, I'm trying to squeeze out every ounce of productivity of every minute.
Right.
And it's leaving me anxious, exhausted, and like you, Mindy, that verse came to mind. It doesn't leave a lot of time for stillness and rest and trust.
Right.
Like, it's not a posture of trust when you're like striving and working and thinking you have to do everything.
It kind of depends on what season we're in. Like when it said, do you lean more towards busyness or laziness? I mean, when all 5 kids lived at home and, the twins were babies and toddlers and preschoolers, and I had elementary students and a husband that traveled and sports schedules after school, I felt like I was maximizing every single second of every single day, which I think when you live like that over a long period of time, when you get to a season where there is more margin, then at first you hesitate to enjoy that time because you think, oh, I'm being lazy enjoying this margin. Am I lazy? But I think how sustainable is it to live your whole entire life with every single minute planned out and no room for any kind of margin? So I know that when I'm too busy, I have a short temper. I don't enjoy anything, even if I might say that that's one of my enjoyable activities. If I'm too busy and there's too much surrounding it, I won't be enjoying any of them. I'm constantly thinking of what needs to happen the next moment instead of the present one. There's this great feeling of pressure. I feel like it's more like I've had seasons of both. And I wouldn't even
Yeah.
say, like, I want to reiterate what Julie said. I don't think that enjoying margin is necessarily laziness.
Right.
No, because I think what it's talking about with busyness is self-inflicted busyness. There's always seasons
Yeah.
where things are thrust upon us that we just have to step up and do it. Like this move.
Okay.
You know what I
Okay.
mean?
Right.
But when I have
Yeah.
just not left any margin in my life routinely, and I'm just always exhausted and never have enough time, like both the laziness and the busyness in really have the same thing as the root. Like you think you're in control. You get to do, you get to spend the time however you want it.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not leaving any time for
Right.
God to say, I need you to do this or
Yeah.
go help this person or, you know.
The busy person would probably say, but I don't have any time to leave margin.
Yeah,
Right.
they would. I think that's the point.
I love your conversation, and I'm taking it all in because myself, as I listen, and I think our listeners, as they listen, I can relate with both. We've all had those seasons of busyness where outside things kind of make you busy, or other people, or stages in your kids' lives, or whatever. But then there's been times where I've had more margin, and both of those do come back to my attitude in both situations, you know, the intentionality, because when I'm running from thing to thing, what is my spirit doing? Am I surrendering the busyness? And am I also surrendering in the margin? Because I can so easily, you know, procrastinate when there's more margin and not be intentional with my day. And then I can so easily ignore the things that I need to pay attention to when I'm busy and stuff them and just say there's no time. Like you said, both of those are, it's just your personal attitude in surrendering both of them, living with intention and surrendering your days. And it's very difficult because I'm constantly, you know, on the fence about every day is different. And and I can't seem to stay consistent with, you know, being surrendered, living surrendered. And no matter what season I'm in.
What did you think that you struggled more with, Julie?
I would always be on the busier side.
Okay. Scheduling too many things.
Yeah, that I would schedule too many things. Yeah. Yeah, I can't sit still. It's very hard for me to sit still and be quiet and rest. Now, not that I can't take a good nap every once in a while, but if I'm, you know, if I'm up, I like to be up and going and doing. And like I have a friend here helping with my move. And last night she said, you need to sit down and eat, you know, like just, you need to chill for a second. And I think I'm just on adrenaline right now. But yeah, I think even in normal life, I would always lean towards the busy side.
I don't like that word lazy. I feel like I like the word margin.
I like that you changed that.
I'm always telling my husband, I hate it when we don't leave any margin. Like there's no room for error. There's no room for one thing to move off the schedule. I hate living like that. I don't want to live like that.
I think laziness would be if you're always procrastinating, never getting anything done, always having an excuse for why this is undone.
Okay.
Not showing up at things. Like I think that's more where laziness would be the correct term.
I don't really feel like I'm lazy then.
No,
I don't see you.
I don't see any of you as lazy. No, but I think we all have maybe times where we might.
Well, I will sometimes just schedule a lazy day, and I don't even feel like that's laziness. I feel like it's okay to schedule a defined period of time where you're going to be lazy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I think this is maybe if it characterizes, you know, like your whole life, like you never have clean laundry or clean dishes.
Okay.
You know,
right.
We
just let it go.
These were hard questions. I talked about these questions with my daughter last night. We laughed so hard because she was saying that she did not perceive me as lazy. And I was talking about margin and all that. And she goes, but maybe I'm not a good person to ask because I'm already in bed watching TV. And I looked at my phone. It was 6:56.
Oh
but her girls go to bed at 7, and she'd already told me earlier in the day that her husband was going out to dinner with someone, and I could just see the scenario. Okay, mom is done. The husband is out.
Yeah.
I am laying down. But it was just so funny. I'm already in bed watching TV and it was 6:56. She goes, you probably shouldn't ask me about lazy.
But that's a great
my
example
goodness.
of scheduled laziness.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. It totally is. And I approve of that.
Yeah, that's good.
Julie, I do feel like after our move here, like it was hard to slow down. But then once I slowed down, it's been really hard to add things back into the schedule because I don't want to get busy again. I really don't. And even the other day I was like, well, Mindy, you could do to like take time to fix your hair again and think about your outfits again and maybe take the time to put a little eyeliner on. I mean, like I have gotten so relaxed. And those are just simple things that came out of, the relaxing season led to relaxed clothes and lifestyle. And yes, like you, Maria, I get stressed if there's a lot of things on the schedule. So to try to have a balance of just the right amount of activity versus margin, because I strive to have quiet, peaceful times every day.
So the last thing that we wanted to talk about was as we get older, I think we start to get more aware of that life is not forever. And that's kind of and I know for me, that was at 50 because I could think, okay, I'm probably not going to live to be 100. So I know I'm halfway through. Now at 49, I didn't think I wouldn't live to 98. But at 50, I just thought, okay, I'm not going to be 100 probably. So I'm halfway done. And that was a bit of a sobering thought. And, your hair starts to go gray. You get some wrinkles. I don't know, like life and aging just starts to teach you this is not forever. Will end. This is not forever. And I don't think when you're young, you just can't even think that way. Like there is no way you think life will last forever. So the scripture tells us in Psalm to number our days. And I just wanted to talk about, what do you think that even means to number our days? And what do you practice that? Or how do you put that into practice?
Well, I did Google, what does it mean to number our days? Because
nice. Googling.
I want to hear from Marie. I don't want to hear from
Because numbering my days to me, I feel like it's having an awareness, a constant awareness that life is not forever. So are you doing what you want to be doing? And are those things that you want to be doing having an impact on future generations? And I am someone that I feel like does like to think about, am I enjoying my life? Now, we've learned from Gretchen Rubin that everyone's definition of enjoying life is not the same. So somebody from the outside can't say, oh, well, what she's doing, that doesn't look like she's enjoying life. But am I enjoying it? And if I'm not, then I'm going to make some changes. And so I don't know if that is numbering my days by just being aware that like the days that I have, I want to enjoy.
Yeah.
So that's hearing from Marie.
Okay. Mindy?
I love it. Numbering my days. I don't have the perspective yet of turning 50. Julie,
so you're still in that no comprehension.
Well, like I see it coming, but I can't possibly conjure those feelings because I'm not there.
You're right. You can't.
And so I know that it's coming. And I just had a friend that turned 45 and she said, like 45 was a big deal. And see, that'll happen to me next year. She said, because I feel like now I realize I'm halfway to 50. And that was a big deal to her to kind of be faced with that. And so I'm just not there yet. So right now in the season that I'm in, numbering my days means remembering the past, but in a way that leads me to gratitude and praise to give me hope for the future. Because even if I only have a couple minutes and I remember the past as of just yesterday, and I'm looking for how God was moving yesterday, it changes my perspective for today. So my view of time is in much smaller increments. I can't look up too far into the future. I really have to have a view of today. And so, but that includes yesterday, and that also includes tomorrow for me to be able to live today with the type of wisdom and living in truth that I need to have Do I always do this? No. Do I want to always do this? Yes. That is the struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, like you said, Marie, it's just an awareness. It's an awareness that every year is a gift. Like we're not owed that long life. And that's just become very real to me in the last 2 years. That we don't know how long we have. So just focusing on investing my time in things with significance, eternal significance. And I don't mean this like super spiritual, like I will become a missionary and I will, like do all this great work, but just like how I live my life every day. Like, is there any fruit of my, like, is there love, peace, joy, patience, kindness? Like, I think the more aware we are that our days are numbered, it affects like how we treat people, how we talk to people, how we serve, how we, and that God giving us that ability is what makes life meaningful, because not every task we do is earth shattering, doing the laundry, cooking meals, running a carpool, like those can all be meaningful.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Through the Lord,
Yeah. Yeah.
One more thing that I feel like is a crucial element to numbering our days, it's the act of forgiveness. I don't feel like you can live with intention unless you're willing to forgive yourself and forgive others. Having forgiveness in your life is a daily act. It's something that has to be incorporated so that you can live more fully. If you can't forgive, then you can't let go of the past and look with hope for the future. So I just had to say that because forgiveness is a huge element.
Yeah. Unforgiveness would definitely keep you in the past.
Right.
Yeah.
Listeners, we'd love to hear what you think about numbering your days, because I love that we just went around and shared what we thought and not necessarily what we Googled. And I'd love to see how other people number their days. You can always find us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast, or you can email us at midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com. This topic is like an ongoing one. And I think every new age frame that you get to, you'd probably view all these questions even more differently. So it's interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. But before we go, let's do I'm a Fan. All right, Julie, what are you a fan of this week? Other than moving boxes.
Yeah, not a fan.
Okay.
Not a fan.
No, the other night I took a little break and I watched a movie. Marie, this is a movie that you've already mentioned as I'm a fan, but I'm going to second it. It was Rescued by Ruby.
Oh, wasn't it cute?
It was what I needed. Like it wasn't earth shattering, but I loved it because it was true. I love true stories. And I don't generally like animal movies because usually they have to shoot the animal in the end or it dies or, like I just can't go there. And there is none of that in this movie. It is all feel good.
Oh, so I'm glad you enjoyed it. It is such a good escape. And if you like dogs at all, you're going to love this movie.
Yeah. And it's true.
Yes. Yes.
Mindy, I think you might even like it, Mindy.
Okay.
And you're not a dog
lover. Give it
a shot. Just turn it on in the afternoon. It'll be lighthearted.
Okay.
Mindy, what are you a fan of this week?
This week, I'm a fan of the Hearth and Home section at Target. I have recently gotten a few things that are just like, I would say they're a little more expensive than like what you find at Target, but they're a lot less expensive than anything designer or whatever, if you're looking for things for your home. So it's a good kind of middle ground, good quality, price. So I just got like some fake flowers that I put by my kitchen sink, little daisies that are so happy. And I just got a candle from that section. So there's a lot of like little things in there. And for some reason, when I walk into that part of Target, like I breathe a sigh of relief and like all this beauty hits my eyes. And I think, can somebody please show me what to do with these things? Because they're beautiful. So just a huge fan of the Hearth and Home section. And isn't that the Magnolia, like by Chip and Joanna Gaines? Okay.
Yeah.
I like that section too.
They've got a good eye.
They do. They do. All right. Well, I'm a fan this week of something that really does change from generation to generation and even within your own lifetime. But I'm a fan of a bra I ordered on Amazon. And let me tell you what I was looking for. Okay. I'm not looking to maximize my size or be the sexiest woman out there. I want actually to feel like I'm not wearing a bra. So like flatten and no underwire. Like I don't even want to look like
we are from the generation of push-up bras.
I don't want, this is
true.
like the very opposite of a push-up bra. Right. Okay. Those are not comfortable. Okay. Especially going into summer where you're like sweating and stuff. No, thank you. Okay. So I saw this on Facebook. Some people were talking about it. It's the Calvin Klein Women's Invisibles Comfort Lightly Lined Seamless Wireless Triangle Bralette Bra. Okay, that's way too long. I think they wanted to cover every single search engine word that someone might use. But let me just tell you that it is comfortable. It is lightly lined. It is seamless and wireless. So I thought that the description was good. It says, it's as good as wearing nothing at all. Calvin Klein's best-selling bralettes for women feature a flexible fit and a sleek, seamless finish. From the Labels Invisibles collection, their softest slip-on bra style designed to disappear under any look, which is what I want to do. Just disappear, okay? Perfect. So one of the tips online, and this was so true, when I link this in our show notes, you're going to see that some of the bras are like $40 and some are like $20. And they said the colors are constantly changing prices. So I ordered one of the $20 colors and then to see if I liked it. And then today I saw, oh, well, a different color I like is now in the 20s. So, you don't have to spend $40. But yeah, you can cross them in the back or you can just wear them the traditional way. It's like very, very all purpose. You're not going to work out in it, but this is just something for like under a t-shirt or shirts.
Good to know. The search is always on.
It is. Always on. So, okay. All right, you guys, I loved talking about time with you today. This was so interesting. And I think we even have one more episode where we're going to talk about a different aspect of time. So there's so much to cover.
I enjoyed our time together.
Yes, I did too.
Oh, love it.
I love that pun, Julie. All right, we'll talk to you guys next week.
Okay. Bye.
Sounds great.
Bye.
Bye.
We're so happy you joined us today. You can find the show notes for this episode at midlifematterspodcast.com. Also, please tell a friend about the show and help them hit the free subscribe button on their favorite podcast app. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast. That's where we post pictures and stories about all the things we talk about in each episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.